Hello, I'm Mark Childhouse, and because things on the internet seem to lose their date references pretty quick, today is Monday, October 9th, 2023. On Saturday, September 9th, 2023, we visited the Hill Aerospace Museum, Hill Air Force Base, Utah. And to start this out, the only negative on this trip associated with Hill that we had, and this I'm putting in for my wife, is we made reservations at the Hill Air Force Base Temporary Living Facility, TLF, of the Air Force. We have stayed in Marine Corps inns, Navy lodges, other Air Force bases, and they've really been enjoyable. The Hill Air Force Base, TLF, was 1 star, below Motel 6. That was our major negative with Hill Air Force Base. It was unset. The Hill Aerospace Museum is a fantastic facility, and this is going to be several presentations going through this, because we took 492 pictures, almost 500 pictures while we were there. We spent probably 4 to 4.5 hours. I could have probably spent 8 hours and come back the next day. It is free admission. The docents are really good. The aircraft that are on display are generally in fantastic condition. The signage is really great most of the time. There's a couple of aircraft that don't have signage, and a couple of signs that are really hard to read, either because they're printed in some mats, as in light green on light tan paper, making them really tough to read. But overall, this is a fantastic museum. They've got some really fantastic aircraft. All Air Force, I think all Air Force, they don't have anything else. And they have neat little facts associated with some of their aircraft. A number of their aircraft are actually assemblies from multiple other aircraft, and they explain that in the signage. Let's get on with this. As I said, there's going to be more than one of these. We'll see how it goes. Thanks for watching. This is one of the buildings at the Hill Air Force Base Aerospace Museum is contained within, and they're building another building, it looks like, next door, and some of the exhibit area is restricted and looks temporary. And as you walk in, as you park, there's a flag circle, and they have a memorial to Medal of Honor awardees. And if you're driving down the road, this F4 Phantom II is a road marker to get you up to the entrance to the museum. You do not have to pass through security installation, security gates to get in. If you look, they're right underneath the tail of that Phantom II. There's an area of the museum that talks about the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the campaign through the Aleutian Islands, World War II, and in that area is this particular display, dog tags of the citizens of Utah that have been lost in service to their country. Admission is free. They ask you to sign in at the registration desk, and they don't have a printed map. I tend to like printed maps, but it would kind of be out of date because it seems like the museum is mobile. This is a presentation of the map that is on the reception desk. We walked through the entrance walkway, which had some signs up about donors and sponsors and the history of the museum and its events, and then walked into the first building, and I took my camera, I looked left, and I took this photo. And one of the things that we learned along the way, and if you look at this photo and the following photo here, not only do you have to look down on the ground, but you have to look up in the air. The signage through much of the museum is great. It's this white on black lettering of the text. It's got the information about the aircraft. This particular Navion, if you're familiar with the Navion, it has a history. It was produced by a number of different companies along the way. People would have success with it, and they would sell it off to the next company. They'd modify it a little bit and produce it for a while and sell it off. And talked to people when I was a ramp rat and a mechanic working as a mechanic who flew these airplanes, and they loved them. They thought they were great. This is a beautiful example sitting there. The North American Rockwell P-51 Mustang came in several versions. A lot of folklore about this, and this properly explains it. The North America took the contract initially from the British government and produced the P-51A. It went through, and that's referred to as the straight back P-51. It has a different canopy on it, and it had very poor visibility. They made several changes along the way, came up with the D, which had the bubble canopy and fantastic visibility, and turned out to be a great fighter. Post-World War II, the North American Aviation Company built for both the Navy and the Air Force the T-28. My understanding was the Air Force got the T-28 Alpha, which had a smaller engine, and the Navy got the Bravo and the Charlie, and the Bravo and the Charlie had the bigger 1800 or 1820 engine on it, and then the Air Force picked it up as the T-28 Delta and made it a counterinsurgency aircraft primarily for for South Vietnam, and hung hard points on the wings and used it as a weapons aircraft. North American was building the B-25 before World War II started, and this is the aircraft that Jimmy Doolittle chose to launch off the Hornet to do the raid over Tokyo in 1942, reestablish American morale, and revitalized the concept that Japan was an island nation, and as an island nation it was vulnerable to a sea power, and we were a sea power. We would also be hopscotching the islands to get to Japan. This CT-39 F/G probably, I'm guessing there was no signage on it. North American bizjet adopted by the military for priority and executive transport. Slick plane. I got to fly one. They had the slats on this bolted up, but the leading edge slats on this come down, and they are aerodynamically operated. This is a fun airplane to fly, very powerful when it's not heavily loaded. North American's F-100, the Super Sabre, was the last of what was referred to as the blowpipe jets. Inlets on the nose, tailpipe exhaust, everything else had side inlets and came up, and these guys would do what was referred to as the Sabre dance on takeoff. If you got in the wrong parameters of takeoff, you could be riding on thrust rather than lift, and the airplane would be running down the runway very nose high, not flying, held off the ground by thrust, and there was absolutely no way to get out of it. Your only option was eject. North American's OV-10 Bronco became a mainstay aircraft for primarily the Marine Corps, and they used it for a lot of things. The aircraft had a lot of versatility to it, very simple to build, very durable in the parameters of flight, very sturdy, took a number of took firepower very well, and it had the ability to take jumpers and put them in the back of the fuselage and then push them out once they were in flight. Not that I saw anybody ever do that. They worked great as forward air controllers, rocket fire support the infantry on the ground, and the Marine Corps flew a lot of them in the Philippines. Northrop's F-89 Scorpion was an all-weather interceptor, one of the early ones. Construction series service started in 1950, according to the write-up. We've seen a number of these in other places. They had several hard points under the wings. They're carrying a fair amount of fuel, so they were good interceptors. Northrop's F-5 Tiger II is a derivative of Northrop's T-38 Talon, the Air Force trainer. The T-38 airframe has served the Air Force and a number of governments in several configurations, including this one, and in the F-20, which is a single-engine anti-insurgent type fighter. These these are painted as air combat maneuvering aircraft for the Top Gun and Air Force, whatever the Air Force's advanced fighter training schools are. If you're wondering, once I took all my photos, I came back home and I sorted them out and titled and sequenced them by manufacturer. So this is Northrop's Snark SM-62 missile system, and it was outside. A number of the aircraft were outside. Some of them had good signage outside, some of them didn't. The Cessna U-3 Blue Canoe is a derivative of the Cessna 310. I've got a couple of hours in this basic airplane as a Cessna 310. It was disposed to the state of Illinois and used by the Southern Illinois University's aviation department. Fun airplane. Cessna also built for the Air Force the T-33 Tweet. This is a side-by-side trainer built early on in the jet age and in use with the Air Force for a long time. Rather unusual for an aircraft to be a trainer to be a side-by-side seating. In the background is a Lockheed T-33 which Shooting Star, which is the basis of the F-80 Shooting Star. The Air Force picked up a derivative of the Cessna 337 Skymaster. This is the Skymaster with retractable landing gear, normally aspirated engines, not supercharged. And they beefed it up a little bit. They gave it some additional window panels in the doors, in the overheads, gave it some hard points on the wings, and it served as a increased capability forward air controller and anti-insurgency aircraft. The guys who flew it that I talked at numerous air shows who said they flew it said it was a super airplane. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt was a kind of unusual aircraft for the Air Force, for the Army Air Corps towards the end of World War II. They preferred to go with V and water-cooled engines, and this one had a radial. It was a tank killer. It took a lot of use and abuse and earned a very good reputation with a very high bomb load. It carried a lot of ordnance of different kinds. It was known as a tank killer. The F-105 Thunder Chief flew a number of roles, and this particular aircraft flew what's referred to as the Wild Weasel mission. What they did was they came in frequently, as I understand it, with the normal airstrike, with the normal air-to-ground guys, with the normal air-to-air guys, and then when the anti-aircraft radar systems came up, these guys picked them up, sent a missile right down their beam to blow out the missile site. And due to technology, we got better at it, but initially all the radar site had to do was turn off their system, and then the missile went stupid and went wherever it went. Later on, they became stabilized missiles, and even when the radar site turned them off, the missile still hit where the radar site was, where the radar site had illuminated. This particular variant of the Republic F-105 Thunder Chief was an air-to-air, air-to-mud, so it was a fighter and a bomber, and it filled both roles very well during Vietnam from all my reading, and took a lot of damage and still brought the crew back. Now the A-10 is one of those aircraft that was built by companies that merged. So Fairchild and Republic merged, and they built the A-10, and with Republic's Thunderbolt from World War II era, this becomes the Thunderbolt II. This was a tank killer. During Desert Storm, we watched these guys fly, besides taking a whole lot of damage and doing a whole lot of damage, or not taking a whole lot of damage, but doing a whole lot of damage. These guys were tank killers extraordinary with a 30mm cannon that just shredded armor. The Fairchild C-119 flying boxcar showed up just after World War II, flew for quite a while. This particular one was evidently with the Royal Canadian Air Force. It's saying that serial number 22107 was. And the way paratroopers jumped out of this is they didn't open up the tail. They opened up doors on the side of the aircraft near the tail, and they jumped out that way on left and right sides and were separated. You will see some of these with jet engines mounted on the top to give them additional firepower, to give them additional thrust, to give them additional power. I've never seen the name Chase come up as an aircraft manufacturer before, but I trust the museum, so they're saying Fairchild Chase C-123 provider. The 123 was one of those airplanes that was built to a T. Whoever designed it should get a Nobel Prize. While it did have recip engines, and a number of them have only recip engines, a number of them also got the auxiliary jet engines to be put on outside, which gave them the additional power to take heavier loads and get out of short fields. This was an extremely durable, extremely useful aircraft, and was one of the very successes of the aircraft design profession. Convair had a series of commercial aircraft, their CV-240 series, which was used as a short haul, relatively low capacity. I think it carried about 35 passengers aircraft, and that was adapted to become two aircraft for the military: the T-29, the flying classroom, and the T-131, the Samaritan. And the Navy, the Air Force, the Coast Guard, and the Marine Corps all flew the T-29 and or the T-131 Samaritan series. Convair built two of the Delta series for the Air Force, the F-102 Delta Dagger and the F-106 Delta Dart. And these were extremely fast aircraft, high altitude, and armed to the teeth. They were primarily interceptor type aircraft, but they were used in numerous other roles, and they were the proof of concept for the Delta type wing, which had no independent horizontal tail assembly. The museum has three General Dynamics F-16 Fighting Falcons on display. A couple of them are quote-unquote squadron aircraft, and then one of them is a Thunderbird, Air Force Thunderbird flight demonstration airplane. This is a single-engine, all-weather, really versatile aircraft. Did its job really well. The General Dynamics F-111 is an aircraft with an interesting heritage. It initially hit the board under McNamara's concept of joint aircraft use throughout the U.S. military to be not only an Air Force but a Navy aircraft, and with expectations that it was going to land on an aircraft carrier. It worked out that that was not going to happen. The Air Force ended up with two versions of it: an air-to-air, a fighter version, and an air-to-ground version. And the only aircraft that really ended up being the effective aircraft was the air-to-ground aircraft, which was used very effective in Vietnam and several other places. As companies merge, we go from Teledyne and Ryan becoming Teledyne Ryan, and they're talking about the AQM-34 Firebee drone. My understanding is this drone was actually used during the Vietnam War as a photo reconnaissance drone, and launched from over water, feet wet, flown remotely over land to get the photos they needed, and then came back. Because it was such a small target and because it was fast moving, it was extremely hard to hit. And then the aircraft, there's a specially configured C-130 that catches this aircraft, that catches the drone as it comes down under its parachute. The Douglas C-47 Skytrain, affectionately known as the Goonie Bird, was a significant hauler in the European theater of operations. It was not pressurized. It had two R1800 engines on it, 1830 engines on it. Carried the paratroopers. My dad jumped out of this with the 101st Airborne during the D-Day invasion and the events after the D-Day invasion. It created its own history. If you look at one of these aircraft, if you find it on the flight line, you need to look at the door and see if it has a cargo door or just a passenger door. If it has just a passenger door, then it's actually a DC-3. If it's got the cargo door, it was a C-47. And there are versions of this aircraft out there as R-4Ds for the Marine Corps and the Navy, which had some variants to it, and C-117s, which were super DC-3s, and they had wheel pants on them and some other things. This is an airplane that was between the two buildings. It looked like it was parked there temporarily because on the other side of this walkway are some other aircraft that are temporary and covered up. If I'm not mistaken, this is a Douglas A-26 Invader. It was the A-26 was the starring airplane in the movie Forever, with Richard Dreyfuss being flown as a fire bomber. This was parked outside with no signage. If I'm not mistaken, it's a Douglas C-54. The C-54 was actually in operation during the latter half of World War II. It was used as executive transport and as cargo, and during the Berlin airlift they were used quite extensively. There are some aircraft you look at, and if you understand their capabilities, you are in awe. But you look at them and you say, if you're going to park it, can you park it around the corner? And that describes the C-124 Globemaster. I will tell you, this is not a pretty airplane. It is an extensive airplane. It's a humongous airplane. It's a heavy hauler. It carries what's referred to as outsized cargo, but for beauty, it's lacking. Douglas and a number of other aircraft designers came up and designed aircraft that were fit to a T for the mission they were intended for, and the Douglas A-1E Sky Raider was one of those aircraft. It was a recip in a time when the jets were starting to come in. Even this aircraft, according to its write-up, was designed or manufactured at the end of World War II. I don't think it saw action. The first actions that it saw were in the Korean War and very extensively during Vietnam, where it was referred to as Sandy. It came in and just pulverized areas. It had a tremendous ordnance load, flown behind a Wright 3350 engine, and this is a compound recovery engine. Really interesting engine. Fantastic airplane, big history. It flew for the Air Force, the Navy, and if I'm not mistaken, the Marine Corps. The combination of McDonnell aircraft and Douglas aircraft. McDonnell built the Phantom II, the second Phantom in its series, and then Douglas and McDonnell merged and produced the F-15 Eagle for the Air Force primarily. The Navy and the Marine Corps did not fly it. This is a big airplane, single seat, big airplane, had a huge ordnance load, primarily an air-to-air aircraft, but also an air-to-air, air-to-ground mission. The McDonnell F-101 Voodoo was a 50s introduction aircraft. It was intended to fulfill the escort role with the bombers. However, when the bombers like the B-52 came up, which could pretty much defend themselves theoretically, it had a mission change and became air-to-air, air superiority, air photo, and a number of other roles. With this one here, there's a bone of contention. It's a McDonnell F-4 Phantom II. It was designed and built by McDonnell. To my understanding, it was after production line ended that McDonnell and Douglas merged and became one aircraft. This aircraft was flown by the United States Air Force, United States Navy, United States Marine Corps, and by numerous other companies. countries, and more than 5,000 of them were built, and they were to different specifications. The Air Force aircraft that had a wing spar that could not take a carrier landing, had different wheels, things like that. The Navy and the Marine Corps aircraft were pretty similar, and both of them could operate off the aircraft carriers. We had these on the Midway. They were big, noisy, and effective. Having read the aviation magazines when I was learning to fly in the late 1960s and into the 70s, and being naval aviator in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, kept up with a fair amount of the hardware of the joint services, because you never knew when you were going to be intermingling with it. I did not know that the Quail was out there. I did know there were several other decoys and drones and remote piloted vehicles that would be used as decoys, but the Quail, that was one that just didn't come up. The engine on this is the J85, which is the same engine that I flew on the T2, which was a twin engine trainer, the North American Rockwell T2 Buckeye. Another one of those airplanes that was in the overhead that I didn't see signage for. It may have been there. This is a Boeing Stearman, a World War II trainer. Boeing designed and built B-17s, and I think B-17s were also manufactured by other companies. This B-17G has a kind of interesting history, because it's painted as the Short Briar, which was originally a B-24 Liberator. However, the squadron transferred up to the B-17s, and the crew kept that name into their B-17s, but this is not actually their aircraft. This is another aircraft that's been painted to resemble the Short Briar aircraft that they flew. If there was a write-up, a explanation of the B-29, the Boeing B-29, the Super Fortress, I didn't see it. There were several signs talking about the nose art, and I'm going to click these through. Their B-29, they clipped the wingtips off of it so that it would fit in the building and not be intrusive on other aircraft, so it wasn't complete. And they have nose art on the B-29 straight flush, which it was a notable aircraft. It flew the weather reconnaissance flight over Japan for one of the atomic weapons drops, so it does have a notable history. And they warn you that the nose art, and I'm not going to show you a whole lot of it, the nose art is frequently non-politically correct in today's environment, and that's just too bad. It was a morale booster. It defined ownership, gave pride in your aircraft. The Boeing B-52 Stratofortress is legendary, and I saw these fly, and they are, contrary to popular belief, they are maneuverable. They came and did low levels on our carrier, and watching them during Desert Storm, they went in and bombed Iraq and did the work they had to do, flying out of bases pretty far away, Diego Garcia among others. The B-52 launched in 1952, first flew in 1952, and it's expected to be in the fleet until 2040, so it's going to have a heritage when it finally retires. There are stories that grandsons of pilots that flew these in the 1950s are now assigned to fly the B-52. Boeing's B-1B Lancer has a heritage as well. The initial B-1A Lancer went into flight test, my understanding, and because of numerous issues and possibly arms limitation agreements, that aircraft was backed out, and we ended up with the B-1B. I've seen these fly. These are fast, and they're low level, and see them with their wings swept back doing transonic Mach flight. They're fast. The Curtiss JN-4D, the Jenny, was never a warplane. It was a trainer, and it was very successful as a trainer, very successful after World War I as a barnstorming aircraft. and it picked up the Jenny name because of the JN in its initial letters. Frequently, aircraft manufacturers were given specific letters to identify themselves. I'm not sure how JN came up, but JN4D ends up being the Jenny. The Curtiss P-40 Warhawk was an aircraft invented and first flew just before World War II, 1938 time frame. It was shipped to numerous countries, to numerous militaries to be flown. Over 13,000 were produced. The most notable were the Flying Tigers used these to fight the Japanese invasion and air forces over China, and what they proved was an aircraft that was inferior to its opponent could be the victor by using tactics. The Lockheed P-38 Lightning has interesting design features. It has counter-rotating props. The outboard blades of each engine are descending, so both engines are critical. Normally the outboard blade is the critical engine and the inboard descending blade is the non-critical engine, but this aircraft's counter-rotating has the engines quote-unquote on the wrong sides. It was done that way for noise and for cooling, theoretically, and I guess you have to go with it. They did it. It made the aircraft, so if it lost an engine at high power setting, the aircraft was a little bit to handle. This was referred to as the fork-tailed devil by its opponents. It could carry additional fuel tanks. It carried some very good armor. It shot through its nose, so to speak, so it had very good bore sight for aiming, and took part in a number of very specific raids, including shooting down the prime Japanese admiral planning admiral for the Pearl Harbor attack, Admiral Yamamoto. Parked outside was a Lockheed C-130 Hercules, and there was no signage for it. It did have the rocket-assisted bottles attached to it. Not going to show you that. Inside, you could walk into the interior of a C-130, a Herc, and walk up and look in the cockpit. These aircraft were parked between the buildings. You saw them as you were walking between the buildings. They were covered up. The front one is an F-80, if I'm not mistaken, and Lockheed F-80. The one on the right, I believe, is a Republic F-84 Thunderstreak, whatever, F-84. The one on the left, I think, is an F-86, but I'm not sure. There was no signage for them. Also sitting between the buildings was this VC-140 Lockheed Jetstar, and I believe it was in a temporary spot. There's an interesting reason why this aircraft has 4 engines, and there are some contentions on why it has 4 engines. When I was going through aeronautical school, I was told that by people that had a role in this aircraft, that the reason it had 4 engines was because at the time it was designed, the Air Force wanted a transoceanic VIP transport jet, and the FAA precluded twin-engine jets from doing that. So instead of getting 2 engines, this thing got 4. The Lockheed F-104 Starfighter has been defined or identified as in numerous places as a jet engine with a pilot attached to it. It is fast. It is extremely capable. In Vietnam, it was actually used in an air-to-mud roll besides air-to-air roll. And there were modifications made to it. The test pilots guys put rocket assist on this thing to make it go higher and faster, and it was flown by a number of countries along the way. Beautiful airplane. I'm envious. I wish I could have flown one. Kind of tongue-in-cheek, they didn't build a whole lot of SR-71s, Lockheed's Blackbird, but we seem to be finding them in a number of museums. This one is the only one that had that second seat, the hump on the back, and when they took journalists, writers, VIPs airborne in the SR-71. This is the aircraft they used for it, and one of the comments they would tell them while they were airborne is, "You're now the highest man on Earth. The only people higher than you are on the space station in orbit in outer space," because that guy sat just a couple feet above the pilot. The Martin RB-57 Canberra, or the B-57 Canberra, an early 1950s production system, so straight wings. From looking at the wings and from reading the write-up, it was designed as a tactical attack aircraft, tactical bomber, and because things evolved so fast, it transitioned to other roles, but there are only 67 of them made. Became a photo fighter. I think I met a crew flying one of these up at an Air Force base in Washington State, Green Mountain Boys from Vermont, and I asked them about their airplane, and they absolutely loved it. They said at very high altitude when they were doing their photo runs, and they were in the LTV Corsair 2 A7 for the Navy and the Air Force. Phenomenal airplane. There are differences. If you look at the A7, and it has a fueling probe on the right hand side of the fuselage near the cockpit that pops out to the right for refueling. It's a Navy version. If it has a refueling socket in the back behind the cockpit, then it's an Air Force version. Looks like the Air Force tried to improve the aircraft, which I've never heard anybody complain about it. Looks like the Air Force tried to improve it, and they worked on two of them, and evidently it wasn't a go. Another aircraft parked outside that had no signage, so we had to dig it up. I'd seen a couple of these, pictures of these, never actually seen one until I saw this one. It's a de Havilland of Canada C7, very limited acquisition, very special purpose aircraft, purchased for, as I understand it, for both the Air Force and for the Army. This display, Grasshoppers at War, specifically talks about the Piper, the L4, in service to the U.S. military. The L4 served in World War II, Korea, and then started into Vietnam, and then the series was replaced by the Super Skymaster, the Cessna Super Skymaster. There were several aircraft that filled this role. It wasn't just the Piper Cub. There were Stinsons, there were Taylors, there were a number of aircraft filling this role. The Bell H-13, or as this version is TH-13T, the Sioux helicopter, along with several others, even though they entered production very late in World War II or just after World War II, were exploited, and I'll use that phrase, exploited during the Korean War, improved the versatility of rotor wing in combat, and as a result, Vietnam was a helicopter war, and that is very evident when you watch a movie like We Were Soldiers. The helicopter is as essential to modern warfare as the Jeep was to World War II. One of the many successors to the Korean vintage helicopters is the H-1 Iroquois. The U.S. Army traditionally names their helicopters after Indian tribes, but the only prominent violation I know is the AH-1 Cobra. The H-1 Iroquois, commonly known as the Huey. The Huey came from the original designation, which was Helicopter Utility-1, HU-1, which when you put it as HUI comes up as Huey, and there are pilots who flew this aircraft that don't even know it's the Iroquois. Sikorsky over the years has built numerous types of aircraft. They were known for seaplanes in the 1920s, 1930s, and into the 1940s. They dominate in helicopters today. The Sikorsky H-3, as shown here, and the Navy H-3 are two different basic aircraft. As you look at them, the airframe is different, but the Air Force H-3 has one nose gear up front and then 2 main mounts aft, whereas the Navy H-3 is just the opposite. It has 2 main mounts up front associated with pylons and 1 tail wheel. The Sikorsky H-53 comes in numerous models. This particular model, the MH-53M, is designed for low altitude search and rescue and lousy weather. It does have refueling in the air capability. The Navy has a version that pulls a sled for mines. The Marines version is primarily cargo. The 53 has been modified to fit a number of roles for the military. This is going to be the last aircraft for this section of Hill Aerospace Museum, and there'll be more, probably at least 2. The Beech C-45, the military version of the Beech 18, the Twin Beech, the notable era establishing aircraft. I've got a couple of flights in a C-45. They were mail aircraft while I was working as an A&P in Southern Illinois, and it was one of the few airplanes that actually scared me flying, not because of the aircraft but because of the maintenance that was done on it. Every time I opened up this airplane, this specific airframe to work on it, I found more issues, more problems, and I wondered how it got its annual inspections, and I wondered how it flew. I got a couple of flights in it and then walked away and said not going to fly it again. I loved the Twin Beech. They had a Beech 18 that was sitting next to it that also flew mail. It was never a military version. It was in a lot better mechanical condition, but both of them needed work. Both of them were at outlying airfields, relying on mechanics who would come and go to maintain them, so they were used and abused. That's it for this episode. Hope you enjoy it, and there'll be another episode starting with the aircraft after this one. Thanks for watching.